Hello and welcome to the Too Much Apparently podcast. If you're new here, this is a podcast for the deeply feeling, overthinking, emotionally overloaded humans who've been told they're too much apparently. And if you're back, thanks for choosing to sit with us again.
We're Alice and Carly, two therapists who are also just sensitive weirdos trying to make sense of life, healing, and our own brains. This isn't a professional advice podcast. It's more like the messy, honest conversations that happen when you finally feel safe enough to say what you're really thinking.
This space is for people like us, the ones who've been called too sensitive, too serious, too emotional, too intense, and have spent way too long believing that it's true.
Okay, on with the episode.
Today we're talking about being too damaged to deserve nice things.
This one's for anyone who's ever finally got something good, a relationship, an opportunity, a quiet moment of peace, and immediately started waiting for it all to fall apart.
Or did something to make it fall apart themselves because somehow that felt safer.
We're talking about self-sabotage, but not in the way it usually gets talked about, as some kind of moral failure or habit that you can just decide to stop.
We're talking about what's underneath it, the belief, often one you've never even put into words, that good things aren't for you, that you'll only ruin them, that you don't deserve them in the first place.
And what it's like to live inside that loop when part of you desperately wants things to be different and another part keeps pulling the rug out from under yourself.
Let's get into it. So maybe if we start with what self-sabotage actually is, because I think it's talked about in different ways. And I really want to set up this episode with the idea that self-sabotage sounds like a negative thing and it can have a really negative impact on your life. But I think it's really important to understand that there's a positive intention behind it.
Yeah, that sounds a good idea, almost laying out from the start. Like we said in the introduction, there can be something really moralistic attached to what it means to self-sabotage. Even just the label and how it's worded and what that brings up for people. And I wonder how many people know that they self-sabotage versus how many people might be listening thinking, oh, I never do that.
Yeah. And so even just the term self-sabotage, there's part of me that's like, I don't even want to use that kind of language, but almost how do you have a conversation about it? If most people understand the kinds of things that we're going to talk about as self-sabotage. But I don't think it's very helpful language. I think it invites the idea that you can just snap yourself out of it, that you can just choose to stop doing it, that it's something simple to change. And I don't think it is. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Just stop jeopardizing things for yourself.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes to my mind, if I was to think about that word and then what secondary word immediately comes to my mind, I don't know what it would be for you, but the first word that actually comes to my mind is trauma.
Okay. When you think about self-sabotage. Yeah. I think the first word that comes to mind for me is protective.
Yeah.
But I guess they go together. That it's a protective strategy if you have experienced trauma. And it's maybe also worth acknowledging, certainly for me, and I guess the same for you as well, I take quite a wide view of what trauma is, and that very often it is not obvious. Lots and lots of people that come and work with me, or just generally people that I know, that say that they've had a good childhood or genuinely believe that they've had a good childhood. And then actually when we get into it, there's all kinds of things that I would consider to be trauma.
Yeah. Well, that certainly comes up a lot in therapeutic work. So often I think we just have that default perspective. And sometimes that's because there is trauma in childhood and the coping strategies that we have developed in order to cope with that mean that now when we look back, we kind of look back with rose-tinted glasses in terms of what was great when maybe things really weren't. And also, it's difficult for people that have a lot of happy elements of their childhood. And that's then what people, I had like a good childhood, and don't recognize that, but there are still things within that have had a big impact.
Yeah.
And as you said, it doesn't always have to be capital T trauma.
Yeah.
Let's take bullying, for example. And there's a type of bullying that would come into people's minds that would definitely think of that as trauma, but they're probably thinking more on the extreme end of bullying.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were someone that perhaps didn't receive bullying on the severe end, but you still experienced bullying, the impact of that is still going to be traumatic. How that impacts different people is going to be different in terms of the impact that that has had. But feeling unsafe in relationships from school could easily lead into jeopardizing relationships through protecting yourself from worrying about being harmed in said relationships.
Yeah, some really good points. And yeah, I think just because of the work that I do, my main focus is on parents and the impact of parents. But I think wider experiences, I even think about culture and the way that our culture, I think, can normalize trauma. Yeah, can normalize traumatic things. If we just take the phrase of children should be seen and not heard, like that was the culture in which we raise children, and that that it all has an impact.
Yeah. Or even just like with the bullying example, some people might say, oh, well, everyone gets picked on in school.
Mm.
So it can also be dismissed that lots of people have bad experiences at school.
Mm.
Therefore, oh, no one should be affected by it then.
Yeah, yeah. That makes me think we really should do an episode on invalidation because I
Oh,
think that
how have we not done that yet?
yeah, I think that is a massive topic actually that would be really good to explore in more detail.
Yes. Yeah. And just to say, this might be one of those episodes that's a bit more one sided because it's not something I overly has featured in my life.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that kind of brings in one of the things that I think about when I think about self-sabotage is that, and I'm not saying this is the case for you, by the way, but that it's not always conscious. It's not always, because I think it can be as direct as like, oh no, this is feeling too good. I'm going to tear it all apart or like burn it all down or leave this relationship, leave this job, whatever it is. I think it can be as conscious as that. And I think it's also really common for it to be unconscious as well.
Yeah. If anything, I'd say more common to be
Mm.
unconscious.
Yeah. And both active and passive. So doing something on purpose. So, like I said, like leaving a job or leaving a relationship or doing something like that. But I think it can also show up in what I would call passive ways as well. So, where you don't do something. So, sabotaging yourself by not applying for the job in the first place, not putting
Mm-hmm.
yourself out there to meet a partner or friends or be part of the social scene at work or any of those kinds of things. I think it can show up as self-neglect in all kinds of ways. Yeah, that there's just so many different ways that it can show up for people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting to think about all the ways it can show up, but also the ways that people might not think that it shows up
Yeah.
or where inaction on something. Yeah. I think you think of sabotage, you kind of think of blowing something up, don't
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
Whereas when you were talking about inaction and not doing a thing, it just feels like the opposite of blowing something up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
probably not what comes to most people's minds.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, as I was thinking about what we might talk about this episode, I was just, I was thinking about all the different ways that it shows up for people and the different kinds of self sabotage and things like that. And actually, one of the things that I thought about was have we, hand on heart, done everything we can to grow this podcast like as fast as we can? And I would say no. And I think part of that is a hesitation of putting ourselves out there. Like it's it's a vulnerable thing to do, right? To put yourself
Mhm.
out there. So I would put that in, for me, in the category of self sabotage. I have held back the growth of the podcast because I've been too frightened to put it out there more. I've kind of done it
Yeah.
carefully. So in some ways, so I can view it as a self-protective thing that this has been a vulnerable project for me to do. And so it's supportive and caring towards myself to grow it slowly, to share it with people that we know, to share it in safe spaces and, go like that. So just last week, I posted on LinkedIn about it. And that's
Mhm.
felt like a massive thing because I'm like, oh, they're all big, proper professionals and they're going to be coming at me with all their research and whatever. But yeah, for me, I would include that as a passive form of self sabotage.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I've never thought about it like that. And there's also a question coming up like, is it like, is that self sabotage? And I'm questioning now the difference between, I think what I'm struggling with is I then feel like you could label anything as self sabotage.
Okay.
Yeah.
I suppose I think of it as different degrees of
Right.
self-sabotage. So,
Hmm.
so I suppose the way I think of self-sabotage is if I'm doing anything or preventing myself from doing something that is in my best interests, that, yeah, I think I would categorize that as self-sabotage. So I think I have quite a broad definition. So I guess your
Yeah.
definition is different to mine.
Yeah. I've never really thought about how I would personally define and view self sabotage. Because I think there's a difference between having something that you kind of know is a good thing and wrecking it for yourself versus something like applying for a job or putting the podcast out there more where you don't know what the outcome of that will be. So is it sabotage if you could just not get that job anyway, or you could put the podcast out there and actually negative things could come back? And yeah, good things could come too. Whereas when I think of self sabotage, I think it is you've already been offered the good thing or have the good thing and then you wreck it.
Yeah, I just think it can be both. I just think it can be both because I feel like the first one is, yeah, the main way that most people will think about it. But
Hmm.
I also know that people can do a lot of damage to themselves within my broader definition of it. I wonder, is there a different way that you would refer to the other things that I'm talking about if you wouldn't term those self sabotage?
I don't know that there's a specific way in which a specific term. There's something for me about intentionally, whether it's still conscious or not, but intentionally denying yourself good things versus something being about fear and comfort zone based on past trauma, something that you can work through to allow yourself to go for something versus one that feels like taking the good thing away. So yeah, I don't know that I can come up with a label as such for
Yeah,
the other part. I guess that feels like it could be coming from lots of different places. But yeah, I'm finding it hard to pin it down.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it is tricky. I suppose I just come back to the protective intention part that if we take the more passive idea of not even applying for the job in the first place, that there is harm to you, or there could be harm to you. Like you could constantly be holding yourself back, keeping yourself small, not allowing yourself success, not allowing yourself to grow. And it's coming from a need to protect yourself from, could be all kinds of things, responsibility, pressure, rejection, or, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do accept it is a very broad definition. But it felt important to set that out as we go through the rest of the episode so that people know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, definitely. And even though this is something that, of course, comes up in my therapy work, something that I would say that I can find myself supporting people with, it's an interesting one to talk about because I would also say I don't think I am super knowledgeable really about self sabotage. And also, I don't personally relate to it. And I'm sure unconsciously there will have been things at play somewhere, but it's not something I would say that I really have lived experience
Yeah.
of. So I feel like this episode is also really interesting to me, and especially understanding like your perspective of it,
Yeah.
because definitely in terms of how much it can come up in the work that you do. I mean, if we are just shame filled,
Yeah.
have such a strong inner critic, which is such at the heart of the work that you do,
Yeah.
I can imagine that self sabotage can really come along side by side.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's why I have just this broad view of it, because I just see when there is that inner critic, when there is that shame, that it just shows up in so many different ways and, has people holding themselves back in so many different ways. And I think understanding it as a protective function, as actually there's a positive intention behind it, it just opens up possibilities for how you might work with this part of you, or parts, multiple, because when you don't see it as a protective thing, when you don't recognize the positive intention behind it, it's so easy to slip into criticizing yourself for it, which just then fuels the whole cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, that feels like the difference between seeing it as a character flaw, something about you, versus recognizing it as a response, a behavior that has adapted
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
protection strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other surprising thing for people to learn about self-sabotage, if they don't know already, is how uncomfortable it can be to get the things that you want. This is a really, I just think it's huge. And I just think it's such an important thing to understand, because I think if you don't know what it's like, then it would be really confusing, to look at someone and be like, oh, you've just got the job you want. You've just got, you just met someone that's really nice, or you've just, whatever the thing is, the positive thing, to then watch somebody feel overwhelmed with it or feel uncomfortable with it or try and wiggle out of it or any of those things. It can be really confusing. But again, there's a process going on underneath that our brains like familiarity, ultimately. They like things being familiar because familiar is safe. And if you've lived a life that hasn't been that happy, then to finally get whatever the nice thing is can feel so uncomfortable and so unfamiliar that our brains don't know what to do with it. And it feels frightening. And so that feeling can trigger the need to self-sabotage, to self-protect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it can be strange for people to comprehend how safety can feel unsafe,
Yeah.
but how it absolutely does when that's something that you've never known. So you don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
So that then it feels unsafe. Whereas the unsafe part, well, I've got that down. I'm familiar with that.
Yeah.
I know how to navigate that. So yeah, it's very much part of it. But I know I mentioned that this is something that, I'm not overly relating to in my own lived experience. But what about for yourself?
Yeah. So I think definitely when I was younger, I can see the more active self-sabotage, particularly being in relationships and just not trusting that the person would stay. And so I don't think it was wholly conscious, but oh, do you know what's actually just popped into my head? The idea of testing people.
Ah,
And I
yes.
read about this. I read about this in Psychology's magazine. Must be 20 years ago now, or nearly. I don't know how long it's been out, but a long time ago anyway. And they talked about this idea of testing people, and yeah, absolutely recognized that I'd done that. So I remember doing it with my first boyfriend, and I pushed it, and I pushed him too far, and he just went, "I'm out." And that moment of being like, "Oh my gosh." Like, I have destroyed this. I didn't need to do that. Didn't need to pick that fight. Didn't need to have that argument. That was really tough. And yeah, that in later relationships as well. Again, not conscious, but just this feeling of wanting to, I guess, prove that it almost feels like a bit of a dual thing. I feel like there was part of me that was trying to prove that they did love me. Like, how far can I push you? Oh, and you still love me. All right, okay, and you still love me. But there was definitely another part that felt like, how can you, like, I'm unlovable. How can you possibly love me? You must be lying. So I'm gonna catch you out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good example of that dual process and how that plays a part in the sabotaging.
Mm.
It's kind of like, again, unconsciously, but we might be carrying this belief that everybody leaves, nobody sticks around. At some point, you're going to leave me too. And if that exists, then we may find ourselves testing, pushing, doing things to test that belief. And often we don't know that this is what we're doing, but we're testing that belief. But the problem is when we do something and the person sticks around that doesn't satisfy that belief, is we have to check it again.
Yeah.
And they stick around. Oh, okay, then we have to check it again and again. And no amount of testing is ever good enough till we reach the point where we've done it so much that they do then leave. And then we just think, knew it all along.
Yeah.
Look, prove myself right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's part of like the sabotaging. If you push for something enough, you will get it and feel like you're proving the belief deep down,
Yeah.
rather than all the other times beforehand that the belief was not proven. You keep going till you kind of get the result that you want, which you don't really want, but you also kind of want.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's just something about the way that you set that out that really highlights I think both how crazy making the process can be and how shameful the whole process can be.
Yeah.
Just that, like, why would you do it to yourself kind of feeling like, why would I do this to myself? Why can't I stop doing this?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that feeling of being crazy. And I think, yeah, with that testing kind of behavior, like you can feel crazy while you're doing it. You could have a voice in your head of like, this isn't normal, but still can't stop. Like the urge is too strong. The urge to
Yeah.
test is just too strong. Yeah.
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 More often than not, and this is something I've certainly had to learn for myself in relation to testing people, is usually we've already set the test up for the person to fail.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, the conditions through which we're testing people is actually unfair to begin with.
Right. Yeah. That's really important. That's really important. And I know we've mentioned on other episodes, but again, I think it's the Disneyfication of relationships or life, or actually just the way that I think romance, but I also think all relationships, the idea that if somebody really loves you, they know what you want, or they should
Mhm.
know the right thing to say or the right thing to do, or any of those things. It's one of the reasons that I really hate the phrase. I can't even think of the phrase now. I'm thinking about when you're going through a hard time and like you find out people's true colors, or like you know who's really there for you, or things like that. And I feel like sometimes that can be true, but also if you don't. So, one of the great ways that I used to test people and test groups and test friendships was I would just withdraw.
Yes.
And then I'd be like, they haven't even got in touch. They don't care. They don't care about me. They haven't even, in fact, this is a bit wild. This is a bit wild, and I'm holding a lot of compassion for myself as I share this. But I used to be part of an antenatal group, and I was in this antenatal group, must have been in this group for at least 10 years. And I was starting to feel like I didn't really fit in, even after all that time. And we were in a Facebook group together. But I just left the Facebook group, and I think it took them over 2 weeks to notice, which obviously felt horrible for me. But also they were
Yeah.
furious with me that I did that. And I couldn't understand why they were furious with me. I can now. Yeah, but that was a test. It was, and that was actually quite a conscious test. How
Mhm.
how much do they care? How much do they notice? How long will it take them to see that I've gone? And probably part of the picture was I probably didn't contribute that much anyway. So it wouldn't have
Mm.
made that much difference that I left. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That whole the testing and the expecting people to know, I think that's a really dangerous one. I think out of all the lessons that I've learned in my life, telling people how you feel or telling people what you need is a really important one. So, like, when it comes to Mother's Day or my birthday, I have a list of things that I want. And I say, here is what I want for my birthday. Here is what I would like for Mother's Day or Christmas or whatever. I never leave it to chance. I never. I'm very specific about the things that I want.
Right. Yeah. Gosh, there's so much there that I feel like I could comment on. And I feel like my heart went out to past you, kind of leaving that group and sitting around and waiting. How long is it going to take for them to notice that I've gone? Because there's so much in that, isn't there, in terms of just what you needed to feel from other people. And I definitely agree with you. And it's a lesson that I've had to learn to not assume or believe that people should know exactly what it is you need them to say right now or to do right now. And actually, you do need to tell people. Don't get me wrong, it is so lovely when someone's really attuned to your needs and they do know exactly what it is that you want and need. Like, who wouldn't want to have that all the time? Like, of
Right.
course, that would be great.
Yeah.
And it's great when it happens. And it's also really sad if someone never experiences feeling somebody is really gets them and is attuned to them and can intuit their needs. And at the same time, it can't be a given. And sometimes we do need to share. And what's really sad, what really sucks, I say this because I've had a recent experience of it, is when you do open up and tell someone your needs and then they don't meet it anyway,
Yeah.
or they take issue with what
Yeah.
your need is. And so I kind of just want to add that in as well, that yeah, we do need to be open and honest and communicate our needs with others. And sometimes that works great, and then other times it's really sad if that backfires and we get a negative response to that.
Yeah. Yeah. It just can be so painful. And it's taking me back to, I guess, the belief that's underneath these kinds of behaviors, and
Mhm.
so for me, I know now that I had a big issue about feeling that I didn't belong and feeling like I wasn't important to people and just kind of irrelevant, that people would tolerate me, but they didn't really like me, was kind of how I
Mm.
saw it. And I guess because I was so fixed in that belief, I couldn't see anything else. Even if there were positive things, I would dismiss them because
Mm.
it just didn't, it was so far out of how I saw myself. I just couldn't hold on to them. So yeah, I think a lot of this comes back to early, early childhood messages. What it was making me think is around a deeply held and often unconscious belief that you don't matter, that you're not important. I think that, or yeah, fundamentally unlovable is a phrase that comes up a lot, just so much that when we peel away all the layers of this behavior that doesn't make sense, that is what is underneath it.
Mhm.
I suppose I think about self-sabotage as a kind of control over vulnerability, that
Yeah.
that taking the risk to say what my needs are, or to go after something that I want, or to keep hold of something that I have wanted for a long time, feels like such a vulnerable thing to do, that the essential strategy is I would rather be in control. Like, at least if I lose it, I did it. I decided to end it. I decided to ruin it. I did this thing. That is more bearable than the shock and surprise that comes with saying something to somebody and them just being like, don't agree, you're in the wrong, or, whatever it is. That, yeah, it's horrible. It's really horrible. I feel like it's not even possible to get across in words how awful that feeling can be. It can be
Mhm.
such a raw and intense feeling.
Yeah, and really scary, that I'm so scared by this that
Yeah.
I would rather end it. I would rather walk away, be the one to do it first because it's inevitable. It's going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just such fear at what we think might happen,
Yeah.
that we're the first one to do it because we think it's going to happen probably anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So then I think, because it feels so huge, that most people would think that you'd be able to look back into your childhood and be like, right, that was where that awful thing happened and I don't want it to happen again. But I think it's often so much more subtle than that. And I think, I think the biggest thing that I think of is, so the pattern that I see repeated over and over again in my practice is people that struggle a lot with the shame that goes alongside this belief that you're not lovable, not likable, that there's something fundamentally wrong with you, were either born in, generally are sensitive, emotional people, born into either a family where there's one angry parent and one very anxious parent that's not done a great job of protecting the children from that angry parent, or a family where emotions are just completely suppressed.
Right.
They're the most common things that I see. So in a family where emotions are completely suppressed, I think it's very easy to end up with a feeling that you don't matter, because
Yeah.
every time you voice any kind of emotional need, it's it's okay, don't cry, stop, make it stop,
Hmm.
is the message. And I think what's also important and can be missed in that dynamic when we look back as adults is just how powerless we are as children. And also that we're supposed to be able to believe our parents. So if they respond to us in a way that gives us the message that we're not important, that our needs are not important, that our needs are too much, or anything like that, you're just going to believe that. you are going to believe that you are the problem. It is overwhelming for a child's brain to believe that their parents are the problem.
Yeah, yeah. Just
So
wouldn't happen.
right. Yeah.
No, it's always going to be your fault and something to do with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't get addressed, and why would it? Because you're probably not telling anyone about it because it probably just feels normal and you probably feel ashamed about it. And, you probably feel like you just need to be less emotional or less sensitive or whatever. So it doesn't get addressed, but I think about it as like a snowball kind of thing. So it starts off as this will be better if you're watching on YouTube than listening on the podcast. Sorry guys. I'm making like a pea-sized shape with my hands. So it starts off as this like pea-sized interaction. It doesn't, it could be a big thing. There's every chance it could be a big thing that you can point to and be like, oh, there was that thing. But I think also it can be a pea-sized thing repeated often enough or just not addressed. And then you go out looking in the world for like the different ways that that's reinforced and dismissing all of the evidence to the contrary. And before you know it, you've got this whacking great snowball of evidence that you are unlovable and that you don't deserve good things, that you don't deserve a good life, that you are a problem.
Yeah. That was a
Mm.
really good analogy for how, well, especially for what we're talking about today, but also for other things as well, how people think it's going to pinpoint back to this one big thing that stands out. Like, as you say, it can do, but so often or not, it's repetition of experience over and over again
Yeah.
and it not
Yeah.
being dealt with. And yeah, changing it from like a small pea, I don't know, a pea at the start of a hill that keeps rolling and somehow that teeny pea ends up into this
Yeah.
huge, massive snowball
Yeah.
is a really good analogy because it comes back to people who maybe don't have any big standout things in their life that say, I feel rubbish about myself and feel down and depressed, but I've got no reason to be. I don't know why.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like it's terrible. I think there's a part of me that almost feels gleeful. I don't think that's the right word.
I know what you're going to
Excited.
say.
But I just excited of like, let's find out. Like this
Yeah.
absolutely definitely makes sense. Like when people say to me, I felt X for no reason. I felt sad for no reason. I felt anxious for no reason. Like it's never for no reason. There's always
Mm,
a reason. It might not be obvious. It might not make sense to anybody else, but I promise you there is something under there that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. It makes sense in your experiences. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I know I do practice CBT, but I practice it in a way that fits with how I work. But traditional CBT, I think that's why so many people can say that it can feel invalidating. Because if you're presenting with health anxiety about getting cancer, for example, and then you're told that that's a distorted thought, and yet several close people in your life throughout your lifetime have died from cancer,
Yeah.
well, it's not a distorted thought, then, is it? Like in your experience, why would you not be worried
Yeah.
about getting cancer? And I appreciate that it's still maladaptive, it's still not helpful.
Yeah.
But that is something that I've often really struggled with because I'm there in the lectures with my hand up being like, yeah, but they would worry about that. That makes sense.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's one of the things that I struggle with when it comes to CBT is like, I think just having the empathy for how come they're so anxious about that. And like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. Like that, it makes sense. It makes sense that you would be afraid of that. It really
Hmm.
makes sense. I think that goes a long way. Well, it certainly would for me
Yeah.
anyway. And this comes back to the invalidation again that we were talking about earlier, doesn't it?
Mm.
But yeah, I think, but important to catch, like you say, about it being maladaptive, or I think about it as resourcing thoughts or de-resourcing thoughts. So just
Hmm.
helpful or unhelpful. Does this help you get to where you want to go, or is it holding you back kind of thing?
Yeah, bringing it back to the early childhood experiences, there are so many different things that someone can experience that could leave them with the belief of they don't matter or their needs aren't important. It's just so easy to see how this comes about, how easy it is to hold the belief that your parents aren't the ones in the wrong, it must be me.
Yeah.
Also, the perceived sense of safety it's going to give you by it being you, because actually, what would it mean if you actually did hold your parents to account? to blame as a small child and then be powerless to do anything about it because that's my parent. So it's much more tolerable if it's me, because then I can change, I can be better, I can be good, I can do what it is that they need of me. And you do that for long enough. And how can you not walk around with this belief that, yeah, either there's something wrong with me and I don't matter?
Yeah. And it's uncomfortable to sit with. I think it's even a challenge to sit with in therapy, the space where it should feel okay to talk about this stuff. But I think it's a challenge. It's certainly a challenge as a client, if I think about my own experiences as a client, to admit this stuff, especially so if we kind of go back to a few episodes about, being too smart to be struggling or too, self-aware, all of these things. So where you've got all of this knowledge, but you're still struggling with it,
Mm.
that can be really hard. And I think it can also be a challenge as a therapist to sit with it, not as in like it's too much for me to handle or too much for therapists in general to handle, but just it's really hard to sit in that amount of pain and not want to fix it all for the person.
Yeah.
And that is the work of being a therapist, is sitting with those difficult feelings. But it is tough. It's sad. Maybe that's more what I mean. It's a sad thing to sit with. And I think if you don't understand the depth of the process, it's probably reasonably common for even therapists who don't have that knowledge to skip over things because they've not quite grasped what else, the deeper thing that could be going on underneath. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Mm.
And that there are so many things that I hear about on a day-to-day basis that conjure up feelings of sadness in me. But I think there is nothing more sad than having a truly just awesome person sat in front of you and they're sitting there saying, I am worthless and I don't matter.
Yeah,
And that's their fundamental belief.
yeah,
And you're right, as a therapist, it's just being able to sit almost with your own discomfort. That's how they feel when you're sat there thinking, you're like, you're awesome, you're an amazing person, all these things that obviously you're holding in your mind, wishing. It's that classic thing of when you wish someone could see themselves the way that you see them.
yeah, yeah.
But it's so sad when people's experiences have pushed them to the point of believing that they are broken.
And then that is going to change the way that you show up in the world. If that is the belief that you have, if you have enough repeating experiences of that. So one of the pieces of theory that I love from the modality of therapy that I'm doing my master's on at the moment is called injunctions. So this is 12 unconscious, generally, messages that your parents may have given you. And I'm just going to list through the 12. And I just want you to think about, as I'm listening through them, how it might impact you to be successful or believe that you deserve to have nice things if you have unconsciously been given any of these messages. Right, so here's the 12. Don't exist. Don't grow up. Don't do anything. Don't be you. Don't make it. Don't be important. Don't be well or sane. Don't be close. Don't belong. Don't think. Don't feel. And don't be a child. So I feel like some are more obvious than others. But if you've got one of these messages from your parent, I kind of feel like, how can you, like, if you've got a don't exist message from your parents, how are you going to take up space in the world, full stop?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you've got a don't grow up message from your parent, how do you become an independent adult?
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be hard to do. Don't be you, I think, is a really interesting one that I see popping up for people. So that's where I often see people that have started down career paths that they don't really want. They've done it because that's what's expected of them by the family. And then they can't understand why they're procrastinating, why they hate their job, why they're, not pushing up the career ladder. And actually, when we start to look at it, they don't even want to, or their version of success is not something that the family is going to approve of. So if you grow up in a family where STEM subjects are the thing to do, and actually you're an arty, creative person, it can be, I imagine it's soul destroying to be sat in front of a spreadsheet doing your accounting job. When really you want to be getting out the paints and the sponges and the colours and whatever. But yeah, don't make it. That's another one and that's a massive part of my story. So when I started my private practice, I had a bit of a breakdown and had to go back to therapy. And part of what I uncovered in that process was that I had got competing messages from my parent. I had simultaneously got be successful and therefore, don't fail, which was a heck of a lot of pressure. But I also had don't succeed because I had a parent that needed to be needed.
Mm.
So I'm then frozen in between. Like, how do you move forward at all?
Oh, no, absolute paralysis in the middle of those two things. Yeah.
Right. And so I moved past it enough to set up my practice. But then what I realized in one of my supervision sessions a few years ago was that the way that I had handled it was to find such a narrow path in between those two. And so I was just about succeeding, but in a way that was really holding myself back. So it was almost like a tightrope of a path instead of really giving myself room to grow and really feel successful.
Mm.
Yeah, but yeah, so having competing messages as well, that can also be really hard.
I think one of the things that's interesting about these, so they're called injunctions in
Yeah,
the modality that you're training in,
yeah,
where they feel strongly like they tie into core beliefs and conditions of worth and things like that as well. But unless someone is really reflective or have been through the therapy process to understand what messages that they've been given, I don't think it's obvious that these things are obvious. I think there are many people who would read that list and think my parents didn't give me any messages of the sort.
yeah,
Literally none of those,
right.
because it's not explicit.
Yeah,
It's not one thing. It's not that every night you're going to bed, your parent says, remember, Alice, you must succeed, but also not succeed.
yeah,
It's not overt. It's not clear from a list for someone to go, oh, I've had that message, I've had that message, I've had that
yeah,
message, because it's so subtly woven in everyday interactions
yeah,
that unless you're really able to be really reflective or work with a therapist to get down under the layers of, okay, well, what was the messaging there?
yeah,
It's hard for you to even know. This is why it's all unconscious because, well,
yeah,
as you really dig deep, it's hard to actually find what the messages are
yeah.
that without your knowledge actually control a lot of your life, like what you
Yeah,
do.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a really good point. And so much of it is unconscious. And like I say, so at the point that I was going back to therapy, when I had that breakdown and realized that I'd got the message of don't succeed and don't fail, I'd already been in therapy for 6 years at that point. And at the
Yeah.
point that I had this further realization a couple of years ago, I must have been in therapy for another 4 years on top of that, perhaps. That yeah, there just can be layers and there can just be layers and layers and layers to it. And yeah, while I don't like to think of it, I've no doubt there are even more layers for me to get to. But yeah, absolutely, absolutely, it can be so subtle and quite often not verbal as well. Like I think sometimes it can just be, if you talk about. So just for an example, so if you're someone that's grown up in a family that values STEM subjects, is expecting you to go to university and have a proper job, and you come home from secondary school and you're like, oh, I'm going to join the drama class. Your mum just goes, oh, right. Are you? Oh, okay. But what about chess club? I thought you were going to chess club. It doesn't need to, I suppose that is verbal, but it can even just be a flash of a micro facial expression across somebody's face, especially if you're somebody who is sensitive, especially if you're somebody that is really attuned to people's responses to you, which you're probably going to be if you're full of shame,
Mm-hmm.
um, then it's really easy to pick up on these negative messages.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, I think that's important to highlight that it can be a small throwaway comment that on the face of it might seem like a nothing comment, but
Yeah.
actually can hold a lot. And it can be tone of voice, it can be a look, it can be saying something and getting silence.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be so many different things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really common actually that if somebody, not for everybody, and like I said at the beginning, I think there's different degrees of the ways in which self-sabotage can impact people's lives. Like it might be that you sabotage yourself for a while and then you manage to move past it and apply for the job. And it doesn't hold you back in a big way. But if you're somebody who has for years found yourself repeating and repeating the same unhelpful patterns or holding yourself back in a way that just isn't helpful for you, quite possibly it will take a long time. I think it is one of those things where I just think the culture at the moment is that people want a quick fix. They want the fix yesterday. They want something that's going to be really fast. They want to just, this next supplement that's coming up as you're scrolling on your feed will fix all your problems. And of course we do, because it's painful. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that actually it can take a really long time to undo this kind of thing. And I think part of the reason that it takes so long is because it's not just a thought thing. You can't just think differently. You can't just be like, oh, right, well, that's a silly thing to do, so I'm going to do the other thing. Because it's not just thoughts. It's nervous system. It's in your body. It's your identity.
Yeah, definitely. What came up for me actually is I think what can make it hard is not just like the self sabotaging behavior, but also your appraisal of the behavior and the meaning that you're making out of your behavior. So, what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you're somebody who has found yourself doing things that has meant any friend that you've had has left and stopped being your friend.
Mm.
And if the core of that is, well, nobody likes me anyway, they're going to leave me anyway. And so you unconsciously sabotage your friendships so that they leave. Well, firstly, you've got to get to the point of knowing that that's what's going on.
Yeah.
And secondly, you have to get to the point of acceptance that this is a pattern that I am playing.
Yeah.
Because I think there's an extra level of protection that can be added onto this, which is we then make it everybody else's fault.
Yeah.
So it's not that people have stopped being my friend because why do I keep sabotaging relationships and pushing people away? But people are stopping being my friend because the world is awful and everybody is awful and everybody leaves me.
Yeah.
That's an extra way that we can protect against the self-sabotage,
Yeah.
that it's quite painful to recognize that we're the one getting in our own way. So it's so much easier if the world and everybody else is to blame.
Yeah.
So it just adds another layer of something you've got to work through before you can even accept that, okay, I need to look at my own patterns here and then work on your own patterns.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important to frame self-sabotage as a positive intention thing. No matter how destructive it is, that you have to be able to see the positive intention behind it, and that you have to be able to offer yourself self-compassion, or be willing to be curious about other people offering you compassion in that struggle, because otherwise it's just too bleak. It's just too bleak to be sat with. There's all this pain in my life and also I'm causing it. Like that. And actually I would argue that that's too harsh a framing, that it's not as straightforward as I am causing it, that that actually it's deeper. There are causes that go further back. But there is also something empowering in that if you can take responsibility for it, and I love switching the word responsibility around to make it the ability to respond to your life. So if you can take responsibility for it, then you can be in control of it, have more control. Obviously, you can't have total control over it, but you can have more control over it.
So what would you say to someone who is at the point where they recognize that they get in their own way? And let's say that first initial recognition is there and somebody is wanting to try to challenge this and do something about it now. I appreciate this is a very big topic that someone would work through for many, many sessions in therapy, but where's just a good starting point?
I think it would be about being curious about, how might this behavior be helping me? How might this way of living, how might these choices, how might it be helping me? And really being mindful about probably the logical part of you is going to jump in and be like, well, it doesn't help me at all. There's absolutely no point. Why am I doing it? It's ridiculous. But if you listen to the emotional part of you, actually, perhaps you can get to something that, even though it might not make sense, the strategy probably isn't working out for you overall. But being able to be curious about it, it can start to make sense that if you're terrified of rejection, probably you're not going to apply for the job, right? If you're convinced that you're unlovable, then, yeah, like I said before, it feels more comfortable to feel in control and end the relationship. You be the one that ends it, than risk trusting that the person is going to stay and risking them leaving.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think so being curious about what could the positive intention, what could it be? I think is one of the big things. And the other thing that I wanted to mention before we finish is the idea of affirmations, which I wish I could remember which creator it was that did it. I'm sure she's got Ruby in her name. I'll try and find it and put it in the show notes. But she talked about, instead of affirmations, try affirmations. So standing in front of the mirror and being like, I'm a great person, it just feels awful and wrong, and it's not going to, it's never going to work.
Mm-hmm.
But what about trying something like, what if I could get this job? What if I am good enough for this role? What if I do know enough? What if I am worth sticking around for? It's just a gentler way in that other
Yeah.
parts of you might be able to respond to, rather than shutting it all down straight away.
I love that, especially because so often, actually, what ifing usually is a harmful thing to do, isn't it? And I love the turn on that, where actually there can be a great place for what ifing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What if I am skilled enough to do that job? What if I could be lovable enough to stay in this relationship? Just posing it as a question.
Yeah. And I guess the final thing I'd say is around, we are wired to stay connected to people and to our parents in particular. And it can feel intolerable to do anything or think anything or explore anything that risks that connection. So we touched on how intolerable that would be for a child, but actually I think that applies even as adults.
Mm.
And that if the self-sabotaging behavior is fueled by early childhood stuff that meant that you came to believe that you were the problem, and actually there's something in your parents' behavior that really wasn't helpful for you, that if you really unpick it, you'd have to challenge your parents, or at least accept in yourself that your parents' behavior wasn't helpful for you, that can be an intensely painful process to go through. And so it makes an awful lot of sense that you would want to avoid that.
Yes. Yeah. No, that was really well put.
Feels like a sad note to end on, but I'm just going to resist the urge to end what is a really difficult topic in a light and fluffy way.
Yeah, that is okay. We can do that. And there was hope in there too, but it's a difficult process and quite confronting. And actually, sometimes that's the truth of the matter. We don't have to fluff up the truth, do we?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you've ever felt like you're too damaged to deserve nice things, like you'll only ruin what's good, or that somewhere along the line, good things stopped being for people like you,
Maybe that's not the truth about you. Maybe that's a story you inherited from people who couldn't show you otherwise.
you're not sabotaging yourself because you're damaged. You're protecting yourself the only way you knew how, and that protection once made sense.
Next time, we're diving into Too Sensitive to Run a Business, thinking about building a business when you're sensitive, values-driven, and don't want to do it the usual way.
But for now, we'll leave you with this. What's one small thing you've been refusing yourself? A rest, a comfort, a moment of pride that you could allow this week just to see what happens.
That's all from us today. If this episode made you feel a bit less alone, the best way to help us reach more people is to subscribe, rate the podcast, and follow Too Much Apparently on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Those simple clicks help other sensitive humans find us when they need it most. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.